About your career, you've been in the army, you've been a photojournalist, you've been to some of the most horrendous war zones of the 1980s and the 1990s. How does this situation in Ukraine look to you?
All of this is coloured a bit from my own personal experience. As a small kid, I was in the States during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I saw the TV ads, in case of nuclear attack. I was a young officer on the border with East Germany. And, one day when I was duty officer, I thought the balloon was going up. In fact, it wasn't. But I think of all this stuff within that context. I think what's happening in Ukraine is very sad. I helped Solidarity with their struggle in Poland. I smuggled ink to the printing presses in Gdansk. And that
must have been a fascinating period.
Oh, fascinating, absolutely. And, Russian tanks, no thanks, the badges that people had.
And Walesa, this extraordinary figure.
Unbelievable, yeah.
Almost came from nowhere.
Yeah, proper popular politics, people power, on an extraordinary scale, but not quite as we saw it on the Western media. I mean, there were quite a few socialists within that Solidarity movement, a lot of unionists. It wasn't quite what the British and Western media were telling us, and which was convenient to maybe Thatcher at the time or whoever. And I always feel that with the news, having reported on news and having actually been at these places and had foreign news networks trying to sex up their coverage sometimes. I'm always very aware of that. I never quite believe.
You mean that President Zelensky may not be the second coming?
Yeah, he may not be the second.
Quite. We obviously feel great sympathy.
And a Ukrainian, a very intelligent Ukrainian lady who's a professor in the UK was telling me the other day that we're not doing the Ukraine any favours by having, this mono news. Zelensky hero, Putin bad. There are subtleties which we should discuss. Subtleties about the eastern regions and stuff like this. That said, I've been fighting off all sorts of people who appear to be Russian assets online, and that's another deal too. I mean, we are manipulated. We're manipulated by all sides in war.
Yeah. I mean, Ukraine is a very corrupt country with all sorts of problems. But I suppose my feeling is that what Putin has ultimately done is to invoke, flawed though it is, to go into a sovereign territory, and that is at the heart of the problem.
It is appalling. Brutal Russian forces are attacking innocent Ukrainian citizens. There are some grey areas. There's some interesting old history, which doesn't get discussed really on the 10 o'clock news, and we ought to discuss that. We ought to think about it. And of course, Ukraine had lots of problems before this started. It's not an advanced, democracy as we are. It's a democracy, but it's a democracy that's got lots of issues and problems.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And all of that sort of stuff. But meantime, it worries me that I see a very different sort of deal going on social media, for example, than I do on the news. Now, some of the social media veers to extremes, but the reason that it veers to extremes, I suspect, and I did have 70-odd thousand people following me, now it's about 65,000 because I spoke up about it, is because people, I think they don't like to feel controlled. And when they feel controlled, perhaps they veer towards extremes in despair or whatever. That is a problem that we face.
Now, in your